We all know that our SAT and ACT scores, high school GPA, extracurricular activities, and recognitions play huge roles in our college admission. However, have you ever considered how your race and ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and the reputation of your high school district influence admission officers' decision? You might have wondered when you were filing out a college application that asks personal details like how much your parents make in a year and what race group you belong to, but never fully understand why. Today, I want to inform you on the affirmative action policy in the setting of college admissions. According to the CNN in 2018, affirmative action policies focus on improving opportunities for groups of people, like women and minorities, who have been historically excluded in the United States society. The initial emphasis was on education and employment. Though initially the policy was implemented on a good thought, the outcome had led this policy to be one of the most polarized social issues. Application of affirmative action is impactful to many, including the audience that are sitting here today. It is important to be aware of a policy that affected your college admission experience or will affect your post-undergraduate education. This topic will be explored in three parts. First, I will be discussing the history of affirmative action and its role in education. Second, I will be discussing the controversy behind affirmative action and its positives and negatives. Third, I will be discussing the future of affirmative action. Let's see how affirmative action came about. According to the article, Affirmative Action in Undergraduate Education, released in 2015, affirmative action was outlined by President Lyndon Johnson in 1965 during a commencement speech at Howard University. He noticed there was a huge educational gap between African Americans and whites. He pointed out there is a need to take affirmative action to overcome the historical prejudice and disadvantages faced by African Americans. Though the affirmative action was mentioned in the setting for educational purposes, there were no formal federal law that guaranteed affirmative action in higher education. The affirmative action policy that was actually signed in the Executive Order of 11246 only encompasses employment. It is not until the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963 the discussion of affirmative action in higher education was brought up again. According to the article, The Origins of Race-Conscious Affirmative Action in Undergraduate Admission, released in 2013, the wave of riots on college campuses, particularly in Harvard University and Yale University, by African Americans that advocated for greater representation, brought up the discussion. The discussion also credited liberal-minded administrators that were inspired by moral claims and the civil rights movement, which mobilized the shift from racially neutral college admission to race-conscious affirmative action. There were no standardization of how affirmative action were carried out on college campuses. There were policies that were implemented that aimed to expand and enhance the pool of minority applicants through talent search programs or through preparatory or bridge programs for prospective students. There were also quotas that were established for minorities in college admission. It was not until the Back case of 1973 that groundwork for affirmative action in college admission were laid. According to 13.org, Alan Back is a white applicant that was denied twice by the medical school of the University of California at Davis, despite having MCAT scores, GPA, and benchmark scores higher than those of some minorities applicants recently admitted. He sued the University of California for violating the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. The Supreme Court ruled that racial quotas in admission process was unconstitutional, but a school's use of affirmative action to accept more minority applicants was constitutional in some circumstances. The Back case gave an outline to the modern-day use of affirmative action in college admissions, and also sparked the controversy on fairness of this policy. I will be discussing the controversy behind affirmative action and its positives and negatives. Supporters of affirmative action often support the notion of equity over equality, meaning giving people what they need to be successful. National Conference for State Legislature says that affirmative action is more than just admissions. It also means initiating programs that offers financial aid to underrepresented groups and on-campus programs that ensure academic success. It also increases on-campus diversity that benefits both majority and minorities. It benefits minority graduates by increasing their overall standard of life through finding jobs with better income, etc. Supporters believe that affirmative action is to help those with lower socioeconomic groups that are exposed to less resources, since certain racial or ethnic groups are frequently in lower income brackets. Affirmative action was not necessarily used to compensate for racial disadvantages, but for solely economic disparities. On the other hand, critics of affirmative action say that the action is just a quick fix for systematic racism and sexism because it tries to compensate for implicit sexism and racism that occur in the college admission process. Since colleges tend to advocate more for diversity and inclusion than the workforce, there's still disconnect. Understanding affirmative action, the authors try to discover the lasting effect of affirmative action by following 27,000 students that were admitted to law school. The data shows that African Americans that attended higher tier law schools than did whites with comparable credentials were much less likely than whites to complete law school or to pass the bar. The article Affirmative Action Undergraduate Education mentioned other negative effects. It includes the harms towards majority and minority students. Affirmative action can harm the majority students by giving preference to underrepresented minority students, known as URM. It can stimulate more negative attitudes toward URM students and tension between minorities and majority students. It can lower curricular or teaching standards in colleges and universities to accommodate students from lower academic backgrounds. In addition, the policy can also harm URM students. It could harm URM students who are not aided by affirmative action by devaluing their productivity when encountering the labor market. It could bring URM students that are not qualified academically to more elite schools to compete with students from stronger academic backgrounds. This mismatch could negatively impact URM students when their skill set is outcompeted and they're not able to optimize his or her chances to succeed. Following the pattern of past, present, and future, I will now discuss the potential future of affirmative action. This polarized social issue faces a lot of scrutiny and media attention, especially after the organization Student of Fair Admissions sued Harvard University for intentionally discriminating towards Asian Americans. According to the New York Times in 2017, affirmative action has been accused of favoring blacks and Latinos at the expenses of Asians and whites. Since then, affirmative action in higher education seemed to have shifted to class based instead of race based, meaning to use social economic factor as a substitute, hoping to draw from the overlap of minority and lower income students. Though this might resolve the criticism, the substitution is not achieving result of diversity that matches the racial makeup of the country. For the future of affirmative action and whether it should be banned or not, the article Can Social Economic Statuses Substitute for Race in Affirmative Action College Admission Policy, published in 2017. The article suggests that the elimination of affirmative action in some states have already resulted in drops in the enrollment of blacks and Hispanic. Some of the enrollment drop might be due to the decline in application because underrepresented minority interpret the ban as a signal that they are not welcomed. Affirmative action therefore remains in an awkward position where there could not be an absolute elimination and an absolute encouragement. It is under this type of scrutiny because it directly impacts those who have been historically disadvantaged. From the history, the controversy, and the potential future of affirmative action, we must evaluate and consider our own advantages and disadvantages for opportunities under this system.